Hello, Abnormal Investigations. I want to welcome everybody to the channel. If you have not subscribed, I'd like to welcome you to subscribe, ring the bell, and select all for all of our newest content that's going to be coming out. Nothing haunts a man more than the decisions of the past. The world threw something impossible for me to comprehend at an early age. I would soon find out life is not all rainbows and cotton candy. Many people come here and see the majestic mist rising from the mountains early in the morning, and they think of it as pure beauty. But all I see is gases the hills belch up from whatever they swallowed up the night before. Because for me, the mountains have tainted my very soul and left holes in my heart forever. The wilderness can grant many gifts, growth, new life, clarity, and a vast amount of opportunities. But also the wild can suffocate you in a sorrow and drown you in a dread given the right circumstances. Have you ever asked yourself what you would do in the event of needing a helping hand in a dire situation? This was the difficulty that I was faced with, which changed my life forever. Mike, I grew up in the foothills of eastern Kentucky, what I consider to be the base of the Appalachian Mountains, on my grandparents' farm mostly. I spent the majority of my childhood learning lessons of life with my grandfather. The value of $1 was also how I had my fun digging ginseng roots, hunting for substance, and wildlife population management in our area. My grandfather was a fur bearer like his father before him. Anything that was hard work pretty much is part of our upbringing. Looking back on those years, I would not trade them for anything. We went to church every Wednesday and Sunday. Always had a lot of cousins around to play with in the creeks and streams around the farm. Taught early survival in the wilderness, the lessons I learned never came easy but always held lasting impressions. We only went to town a couple of days a week, when we visited the feed store for our livestock, and sometimes I would rent a movie from the video store uptown. That was as close as I got to the big city lifestyle as a child. The main thing we did most nights, when the whippoorwill started singing and the lightning bugs came out, was to gather our hound dogs and travel to the Daniel Boone National Forest to go raccoon hunting. We did this because, as I said, my grandfather and I were fur bearers. The raccoon population in our area is very sick. So, with it being sick and also, yes, very thick, this was a way to keep down disease and to keep the rest of the population healthy. It was part of our lifestyle to chase that hard-earned dollar. Also for wildlife management, population control, because raccoons can carry and transmit more types of diseases than most animals in our area. We had 2 dogs at the time. Our young dog's name was Bo. He was a red tick hound, and the breed of the animal beautiful in every way. He was mostly red in color with a few white specks on him, almost the color of a strawberry wine. Our older dog was a trained Walker hound. Around here we just called his breed Walker, and his name was Old Jake. He was a giant of a dog for his breed, at somewhere around 120 pounds. He was a tricolored dog, meaning he was black, white, and tan. He was absolutely a great hound, and had a heck of a good nose on him for tracking critters through the mountains of the Daniel Boone National Forest. Old Jake wasn't afraid of anything. Not anything at all. Once he would track a raccoon to a tree, it was in his domain. On this particular night, it was the opening night of raccoon hunting season in the state of Kentucky, October 1st of 2003. My grandfather and I had decided to go on a hunting adventure to the National Boone National Forest. He was in poor health, so I always had to handle our dogs and take care of them when we went out on our nightly hunts. We had gotten a bit of a late start that evening, so we had to travel off the beaten path on a 6-mile road called Shooting Range Road. It's near Clear Creek and Leatherwood area of the Daniel Boone Forest. Once we got to the very end of the road and it came to a dead end, we parked our truck. Then we got out of the vehicle, dropped the tailgate down, and opened up the dog box. Door after Bo and old Jake jumped out on the ground and ran straight down a creek in the forest. It started hunting for raccoon scent immediately. A short while after old Jake started barking on the scent track he smelled, and then Bo joined in with him, making that sweet southern sound music that whistled a gravelly song through the crisp night air. They tracked the scent of the raccoon they were tracing up a tree. It was on the side of a mountain and over a cliff a good 700 yards away from the truck. Shortly thereafter, the raccoon got tired of running and decided to climb a tree. Both the dogs let out was a call we call a location bark, letting us know that they found the animal's location they had been chasing, and they will continue to bark until I get the tree which they are at, because of this is how they are trained to do. My grandfather looked at me and said, "Sounds to me like they found it. Go grab your gun and get out of the truck and take the two-way radio with you so we can keep in touch," because, as I said, my grandfather was in poor health and could not travel on foot very far distances. And as I just got out of the truck, I strapped the gun on my back, grabbed the two-way radio, and started walking into the forest towards the location of our dogs. As I made my way in, I heard the sound of a pack of coyotes off in the distance start barking and howling, going on crazy as a coyote pack does. Grandfather called me on the radio and said, "Do you hear the pack of coyotes? You better get in there quick to the dogs, that way when they see you they'll run away." And I know that might sound crazy to a lot of people, but in our area of Kentucky, coyotes are hunted hard because they cause a lot of harm to livestock. So they're mostly nocturnal in our area and are terrified of people. In almost every case, when a coyote sees a human, they run as fast as they can to get away from them, at least in the state of Kentucky. After that, I started picking up my pace, trying to get into our hounds, but it was too late. Just minutes after the pack of coyotes had made it to our hounds, and within seconds a massive fight broke out. I heard them grab a hold of Bo, and then he started whimpering and took off running and trying to get away from them, but not old Jake. He held his ground right next to a tree he had tracked a raccoon to. I believe he did because in his mind he might have thought the coyote was coming to take the tree away from him, but really they just wanted to eat him. Old Jake fought all over the place with the pack of coyotes. He was holding his ground for a while, but soon after the whole dynamic of the struggle changed and the coyotes were starting to fight old Jake as a pack. My grandfather called me again, "Get in there quick, they're going to kill him." So I started running through the forest, scared for my dog's life. Suddenly again the fight changed, and Bo had circled back around and came back to help old Jake fight the pack of coyotes, and once again old Jake was holding his ground. Or so I thought. The coyotes were whimpering and screaming, and it was just pure mayhem in the woods, an absolute battle. I soon made it to old Jake, and once I shined my flashlight on him, he had a coyote by the throat, then let go once he saw me. He then took off running along with the rest of the pack. I walked over to Jake, bent over, and patted him on the head and checked him out, showing a few cuts and gashes on his face. But overall he was in good shape, meaning that he was just in a fight with a pack of coyotes and lived. Just in front of us was a huge black oak tree, and behind it I heard the sound of a coyote whimpering, and doing what I would call a blood gargle, choking maybe on its own blood. Old Jake and I walked around to check out, thinking that around the tree we would see Bo had killed a coyote. But once we could see, I then noticed that it wasn't Bo. It wasn't Bo at all. It was a great big dog, really broad, bigger than the size of a Great Dane, or even a St. Bernard. Then it turns and looks at me while holding a dead coyote in its mouth by the rib cage, and no part of the dead coyote was touching the ground. I stopped and just looked as if we were just standing feet apart from each other, astonished. The strange dog dropped the coyote out of its mouth and looked at me. That's when I realized how much I underestimated the massive size of this animal. It leaned in forwards and stood up on its hind legs, in a really slow motion that I can only describe as if you have ever seen an elderly person trying to get up out of a rocking chair. At this moment, I thought it was leaning against something, and that was only the logical explanation I could come up with. This thing then takes 2 steps forward while standing on 2 legs. That's when I noticed the chest, because it didn't have a dog's chest. It had the chest of a man, an abdomen. Then the hands caught my attention because it was moving them up beside, and its hands more similar to that of a man but more like claws. I saw its face was a charcoal colored, with black eyes of eternal darkness, with blood coating dripping down its mouth and the chest like hot candle wax running down a wick. So much blood, not like the blood you would normally see in any type of animal fight. It was more so like it was eating the coyote alive during the previous attack before I arrived. Again, the creature takes another step toward me, and I break out into a cold sweat, my mind finally realizing what I was looking at was a damned werewolf, or as some call a dogman. That is not supposed to be of this world. The feeling in my mind was just absolute horror, as if the world around me had no longer existed, and I was in some sort of overwhelming sense of dread. Just in a millisecond, my fight-or-flight emotion kicked in, and I jumped back and started to run. I am shining my flashlight forward as I run in the back and shining it behind me as I run. And as I look back to see what's happening, during this time the sounds of my oversized gum boots were clicking loudly in the stillness of the night, and the crunching of the dead leaves beneath each stride that I took. The creature then begins to chase after me, moving at a pace I have never seen. But soon after the monster took only a few steps, old Jake hit it, and he was lunging his body weight towards the Dogman-type creature that made a loud thud noise of old Jake's body weight slamming into the monster, snapping his jaws together and growling, trying to protect me from any harm. As I shine my light behind me, the werewolf just pushed old Jake off him with one hand like he was just a gnat, a fly, or a flea, like he was nothing. And it didn't bother the creature at all, while old Jake rolled back on the ground 4 or 5 feet. Then the creature continued to chase me like I was the only thing in the world it was interested in. I started to yell out, "Put it to him, Jake. Put it to him. Come on, you can do it." As I continued to run for my life with my gun still strapped to my back, only being a .22 caliber rifle that would cause no harm to this creature, and I was sure of that, other than maybe just pissing it off even worse. I stood at 5 feet 10 inches, and this creature towered me at least 2 more feet in height. As I am running, I finally once again, old Jake attempts to stop him, as it chases me, throwing his own body weight at the monster like the first time it pushed him aside with ease. And back to the chase the werewolf went in my direction as I ran. It had its mindset on me and me alone. I am running with everything I can run with and all my energy my legs can produce through the forest toward the direction of the truck. And once again I started to scream, "Come on, old Jake, put it to him. Get him. Get him, Jake. Come on, Jake, I need you." As this thing was gaining ground on me, quickly, and for the 3rd time, old Jake comes in towards the monster and hits him again with his body weight, and once he did, I heard a loud popping noise, and what I call the jaws of death locked down on the creature. Before I turned around, I just knew that old Jake had finally made a good contact with the monster, and that's when I saw. Jake had his mouth lashed onto the hip of the monster, just hanging there, on like a chihuahua on a mailman. That was the size difference, because old Jake was just nowhere near the size of this damn animal. The monster then stopped and grabbed old Jake with both of its hands, and as sure as I'm telling you this story now, it threw old Jake through the woods like a bag of garbage. I could see old Jake's body flying through the air, hitting low-hanging tree branches, leaves, and then disappearing into the brush. I knew at that point old Jake was dead. It was just me and the monster at this moment, and I continued to run with tears rolling down my face and a sense of both sorrow and dread with the thoughts in my mind that this thing had just killed my dog. I am all alone. No one here to save me. Not even Daniel Boone himself can come up from the grave and help me at this point. I'm a goner for sure. The monster then continued to run after me, and at this point is so close to me that I can feel the heat on my back. Yeah, you can almost feel it breathing on the back of my neck. I am trying to run in a zigzag type of movement the way I was taught while being chased by a predator. While being overwhelmed with emotion, I started yelling once again, "Come on, old Jake, please, I need you. Put it to him, Jake, put it to him." But no matter how many times I yelled and screamed for help, none came. He was gone. I stumbled over a fallen tree branch and fell face down on my belly on an old tree top that had blown over in the forest, maybe after a storm or something. Rolled over on my back, and the creature dropped down on all fours. And I started to crawl back into the mangled tree branches and decaying leaves while the monster continued to pursue me. At this point, the animal and I were at point-blank range, just a couple of feet from each other. Snapping its mouth and snarling, the blood from the freshly killed coyote still dripping down its mouth, mixed in with the snot and drool while blowing its breath right on me, with the smell of rot and decay coming from it. Meanwhile, the whole time, I am continuing to yell, "Come on, Jake, come on." I knew at that time this was it. This was the end. I was trying to crawl for my life backwards while facing an animal just trying to find a way out. And as the creature was now in the range to grab a hold of me, suddenly out of nowhere, old Jake hits the monster broadside, throwing his body weight into the creature, and it rolls over on its back. Jake climbs up on the top of it and just starts mauling him, snapping his jaws, just munching on this monster. Old Jake was really putting the hurt to this dog from hell. I heard Jake's claws lock down. Jake had a chance, because this monster, well, he was on all fours, and that gave Jake the advantage to be able to get on top of him for the first time. And that's whenever I heard one of the creature's bones crunch. The monster let out a painful howl that felt like it rattled the very earth I was crawling on. That's when I realized this is my chance, and I stood up and ran across the mountain once again. I can hear the whole time the battle that was taking place behind me. I was no longer looking back, but unfortunately the situation changed, and I could hear the monster finally turn back on old Jake. And sounded like it was just ripping him to pieces. He was letting out painful barks and whimpers, making my stomach turn into knots hearing the pain old Jake was going through. At this time, I came upon a clearing not far from the truck, and I turned around, took the rifle off of my back, and began to fire into the air. The gunshots echoed off the mountains around me. I started yelling, "Come on, Jake, come on, please, come on, let's go." But the forest went completely silent, and it seemed no noises at all could now be heard. I ran down to the truck, opened the door, and climbed inside. My grandfather said, "What on earth is going on?" I said, "Just drive, we have to get out of here." And then started telling him what happened in every detail I could, as well as trembling in pure terror. Calmly, my grandfather said, "Listen, if you want to hunt, fish, and do stuff as a man, then you need to realize that there are things in these woods that I cannot explain. And you have to come to terms with it if you ever want to continue with this kind of lifestyle." In his humbling words, he then said, "Since you are so upset, I will go ahead and take you home. But we'll come back in the morning and look for Bo and old Jake." I said, "No." Pointing coming back, I heard what happened. "Old Jake is dead, Pawpaw. He's gone. He fought for my life, but he just didn't make it." Once again, my grandfather spoke, saying, "If everything you said is true, then you owe it to old Jake at least to come back in the morning and look for him. He fought tooth and nail for your life. And as a boy, and as me being your grandfather, this is our tradition. You owe old Jake at least a proper burial." We drove home and didn't sleep very much at all the rest of the night, knowing as soon as the day broke we were going to drive back to that area and look for our hounds. Meanwhile, still being filled with mixed emotion about the event that had happened just hours before. Feeling everything from fear to heartbreak to absolutely traumatic event. But as the morning came and the fog was lifting, From the mountains we loaded up in the truck and traveled back into the location we had been hunting the night before. My grandfather got out of the truck and just rolled my window down, and we both began to call for our dogs. "Here, Jake, let's go home." We also yelled for Bo, so at that time I wasn't that worried about him. We would drive up and down the gravel road repeating the same actions time and time again with no luck. So my grandfather said we would go home and return the next evening. And that evening, when we drove back to where we last saw our hounds, we started to call and whistle for them again. On down the road a little bit, we could hear something moving through the forest coming out toward the road. And once it stepped out, my grandfather said, "Hey, Bo, just come on out of the woods, that big red tick hound of yours. So grab your dog leash and go get him." I said, "All right, Papa." I started to walk towards Bo, that was just barely moving slowly. And as I got closer to him, then realizing that wasn't Bo, it was old Jake. Covered from head to toenail in blood, some dry, most still moist. His injuries were beyond severe. Anyone who would have seen him at the time would question how he was even standing with a couple of broken bones and major flesh wounds across his body. But he was alive. My grandfather walked over, and he grabbed all 120 pounds of old Jake's mangled body, picked him up, and carried him over to the vehicle, then put him in the back of the truck. I'd never seen my grandfather do something like that because he was a tough love type of guy. But he was just heartbroken at the moment, as I was. Then we drove out of the Daniel Boone National Forest back to the farm. Most of the people, I believe, would have probably, with a dog that was so severely injured, have just put him down out of his misery and buried him. But we didn't. My mama did a lot of veterinarian work with our animals on our farm, so somehow against the odds she was able to doctor old Jake up pretty much and bring him back to life. From that moment on, old Jake and I had a special bond. We were always best friends, and he lived a long and happy life. I will never forget what old Jake did for me that night in the Battle of the Backwoods, and if a dog loves its human enough, they will battle something that is unbeatable to keep you safe from harm. I gave up on old Jake's life multiple times that terrible night, and he fought for me over and over again. That was a really hard thing to live with on top of the trauma. I was young, and now I know better, but I still feel bad about it. I was not ready for that at the time of my life, and if I weren't for the wisdom of my humble grandfather, then we would have lost old Jake forever. Both of them have now left this world and been called way up yonder to hopefully hunt with the hills of heaven. You can say what you want to say about what terrifies you the most, but to me it will always be the thing I saw. I guess you can always say it was a Dogman, werewolf, hellhound, skinwalker. I'm not really sure, but what I do know is it bled and it felt pain just like any other animal in the world. And so I know what I saw was tangible and real. By the way, about a week later someone found Bo at the local country store, and I was able to also get him back as well. If you don't have anyone to lend you a helping hand in a dire situation, then I pray that you will find at least a good dog at your side that's always willing to give you his paw or his life. Thank you, Mike, for sharing my story from Kentucky. Thank you very much for sharing that story. That was a a very sad encounter for the dog, but also a very unique encounter. It sounded like you learned some lessons during that, and I'm glad you got your dog back. Sorry, my allergies are terrible today. But, yeah, thank you for sharing that with me, and I look forward to seeing everybody's comments on this. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of comments. You owe your life to your dog. That's all I know to tell you. That dog fought for you and fought for you. That dog loved you, and I'm glad you all did go back and find him and that he was able to spend the rest of his life with you, both dogs. Like they say, they are our best friend, and they will give their life for you. So, you had a pretty special dog. Thank you for watching, guys, and until next time, keep your head on a swivel, and don't be something's dinner.